Disclaimer. This post has been brought to you thanks to the generosity of JNES After Dusk. All praise goes to him, all fault lies with me. Also, this post will argue that Stalin did little wrong, so if you're against that view no matter what, it's time to dip. Do you want to improve the lives of people in the here and now? To me, that's what it means to be a leftist. It's not about theory, revolting, authority, or even progress by itself. If you're not trying to improve people's lives in the here and now, you're not a leftist, in my opinion. So why has the left abandoned each other? Or more specifically, how are most people of leftist leanings socially manipulated to accept reactionary myths about the Soviet Union? Short answer, the same way many were duped into suppressing minorities. But we can expand on that. Now, it's important that we define our terms here. I'm going to be talking about things from a Yankee perspective, but there are equivalents elsewhere. In simple terms, the left is the progressive faction of politics, those who seek technological and social advancement. The right is the conservative faction, seeking to keep things the same. Obviously, there is nuance, but that's the shortest summary possible. Naturally, the attitudes of people will shift based on circumstances, and these circumstances are what we're here to examine. If you want to be comedic about it, I would argue that what separates the left and the right is who you force to live through your terrible decisions, yourself or everybody. Right-wingers tend to ignore the wisdom of crowds for the stupidity of the herd. Personal liberty is the highest good, but they ignore the results and necessity of collective efforts in achieving this. George Lakoff has written and spoken about how the conservative brain and mindset works, how an overwhelming focus on self-reliance results in the suppression of abortion, ridiculous levels of inequality. As PhilosophyTube has pointed out before, these terrible values aren't separate from Enlightenment reasoning and thus modern Western civilization, but are in fact baked into its very fabric. See, slavery. Unfortunately, conservatives control the discourse in the West, and as such they've suppressed our most important tool, our history. And history is important because the past is unwavering. It's beyond being set in stone. To use a cliché, the story of our past is marked into our very bodies. The left has been divided in order to force us to surrender history. We must ask how this has happened, for it is in learning the how that we may figure out how to stop it. The left wing of conservatism, the anti-authoritarians. I want to start off with an important fact brought up by Michael Brooks. Sympathy is not solidarity, and I will go even farther than that, as to argue that you cannot have true solidarity with someone who doesn't view history in a material way, but rather gives credence to myth and the notion that ideas are what shape reality. It is for this reason that I cannot consider myself in solidarity with anti-authoritarian ideologues. Some will falsely claim that I'm doing that very dividing thing I'm critiquing, but this is not the case. All friendships and camaraderie is built on the foundation of mutual advantages. If you're not on board on this level of discussion, then nothing else matters. Simply put, an alliance cannot be formed between anti-authoritarian ideologues and those who want social and technological progress, and here is why. As established earlier, an overemphasis on self-reliance is what characterizes conservatism. The left wing of conservatism, as I like to call it, though Caleb Maupin calls it the synthetic left, are those who use left rhetoric in order to complain about the state without providing a viable alternative, as actually suggesting an alternative would be to take an active rather than passive role in politics. Their job is to neutralize people who would otherwise be problematic to the conservative agenda. There's plenty of evidence to back this up, it's even boosted by the CIA themselves. However, more important than the particulars is the overall strategy. See, getting involved in politics is hard work, and it's scary because it's about the control of violence. It's about people directly suppressing others in some way, no matter how you slice it. You are forcing some people to do things that they otherwise would not do. Whether you're nice about it or not, that's how it is. Given that all states are authoritarian, and the revolution is the most authoritarian act you can take part in, authoritarian just means serving the state. So long as different types of people exist, especially if resources are limited, there is going to be a state. There is going to be authority. The question is, who will that authority serve? The majority or a small group? And the authoritarians just end up serving the conservative agenda. From the Clinton Wrecking Crew faction to those worshipping Jordan Peterson, all such people are cut from the same cloth. Writing on why the Western left hates diplomacy, Christopher Motov, Geotrickster, had this to say, which sums it all up quite nicely. The left of center collectively is all about guilt by association and purity culture rather than actual accomplishment. And it was made that way by design. So we know the how of the left losing its way. Anti-authoritarianism, fostered by the elites, ironically, creates division via excess sentimentality rather than solidarity via material shared interest. But it's important to ask, why was this possible? I threw out there that taking on the responsibility of being involved in politics is a burden, but why is this so? One answer is found in Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman explains why unconscious thought operates the way it does, with the main thesis being that humans default to basic habits to minimize thinking and thus save energy. This goes a bit of a way towards explaining the biological reason why the investment theory of party competition works. Your average person isn't thinking deeply about any issues at any given time. Rather, they can default to conservative views because those are the most widespread ones via wealth's control over the media, and such they're the least taxing choice for the brain. But that just explains some things on a macro scale and doesn't explain the nuances of leftist divisions in particular. For that, we must return to Gramsci and marry his theoretical work with recent discoveries in science, that being evolutionary psychology and the work of Edward Bernays. For those unfamiliar with Antonio Gramsci, you can check out Tom Nicola's video on him, but to summarize, he popularized the idea of cultural hegemony, a dominant group legitimizing their dominance through culture. Where it differs from the idea of investment theory of party competition is in its broadness and its focus on the individual and their day-to-day concerns. While the former focuses only on the actual mechanics of voting and representative democracy, on the straightforward dynamic of class against class, the latter asks questions of family structure, religion, the role of intellectuals, and the academia. The use of cultural text to support a certain status quo gave rise to ideas like the necessity of cultural revolution, but without an understanding of the mechanics, why this functions, such efforts will be in vain. Enter Edward Bernays, the father of modern marketing and nephew of Sigmund Freud. He would take the idea of using cultural text to shape society to its logical conclusion effectively. The corporations who hired him would time and time again gain predominance through consent. In so doing, discovered frightening facts about the human mind, which would later be confirmed by numerous different experiments. Basically, the problem boils down to the fact people will believe what's useful to themselves to believe in the here and now. While capable of longer-term planning, human brains are not exactly for thinking per se. They're for survival, and one consequence of the fact is that they'll prioritize reputation over rationality. Foolishness is, to a large extent, superior to isolation for the brain. Trying to work around this is like trying to work around having to breathe air. It's much more pragmatic to accept this fact, noted in our calculations on human behavior. From the ash experiment to getting women to smoke, there are plenty of examples to show that this is just how humans are. People who are called ideologues are those of us for whom it is overwhelming the case that they've attached their reputation to a specific idea. But this is not necessarily a bad thing in itself, only when it interrupts mutual dealings between people. See Epicure's view on justice. You can be a fundamentalist Christian in our society so long as you break no laws. The issue of ideologues is they're by definition unpragmatic. The only conception of justice that they care about is their own. This is why people can be banned from any communism when they express critical support for Iran. It's why someone like Jason Unruhe can say they fight for the working class while out of the other side of their mouth laugh when the working class people in the first world die in a fire. This is the origin of cognitive dissonance. And this is how the left lost its way. Abandon humanity and seek victory. The truth is out there and must be repeated again and again. It is only through those who know the truth seeking victory that intelligent life can advance. And the only way for the truth to be known and the victory gained is through communicating it. Here's the truth. You should not support the Hong Kong riots. Stalin was one of the best leaders the world has ever seen, and he did not remove millions from this earth, rather he saved millions. He was great and should be honored as such. Leftists of entirely different backgrounds can all agree that capitalism's death toll far exceeds socialism's. Markets are not capitalism, moreover they're shit anyway. And most importantly, socialism has worked for billions and continues to. Nietzsche famously said to find truth from your body. The meat and water I've had has been safe to ingest because of socialists. Child labor was never an issue for me because of socialists. I got to have weekends because of socialists. If I lived in Europe, I'd have healthcare because of socialists. My parents were able to feed me off of their wages because of socialists. I didn't grow up in a nuclear wasteland because of socialists. I was able to develop my mind because of scientific advances made by socialists. Combine all this with the advancement of many scientists and civilizations, all to coalesce into this body that I have right now and experience the world with. Without gratitude, you can't have respect. Without respect, you can't feel real responsibility. Without responsibility, how can you care for others and have empathy? Without empathy, how can you have truly progressive politics? Respect really existing socialism. Seize the memes, and history. Thank you for watching.